All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. It is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Time for some Tuesday Tao, reading from Dr. Wayne W. Dyer's Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And we're learning and living the wisdom of the Tao Te Ching, which comes to us from 2,500 years ago. And today's lesson, ladies and gentlemen, is a big one. It's the ultimate subject of living with no fear of death, going beyond the fear of dying, and how we can possibly do that. Now, this is something I used to like to talk about more because over time, I've found that we each have our own views and opinions on the ultimate subject of death and passing. And so to try to sway somebody in this category may be an area best left till a later time, until I guess it is the right time to come to this understanding for oneself and seek to discover this understanding. And not many of us want to, really. And I respect that, because it could be the ultimate driver in our lives. The ultimate, motivating factor is that we come to believe that we do have a limited amount of time here. But what if, ladies and gentlemen, we could change our thoughts and in turn have this change of perspective change our lives? Well, let's see as we dive into the 74th verse of the Tao Te Ching and Wayne Dyer's teaching on this 74th verse, entitled Living with No Fear of Death. And so thank you for being here, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you got yourself a comfy chair or wherever you like to listen to podcasts or watch videos. And right here, the tea says today, hope you got yourself some tea or a cold beverage of your choice, hot or cold, either way. What we're saying is get comfy, ladies and gentlemen. The tea says today, one who brings happiness to others will find it. Now, let us dive in, before I ramble like I usually do, into the 74th verse of the Tao Te Ching. It begins by saying, if you realize that all things change, there is nothing you will try to hold on to. If you are not afraid of dying, there is nothing you cannot achieve. There is always a Lord of Death. He who takes the place of the Lord of Death is like one who cuts with the blade of a master carpenter. Whoever cuts with the blade of a master carpenter is sure to cut his own hands. And that concludes the 74th verse of the Tao Te Ching. Now, this is one of the first verses I might say myself that I am confused by. I mean, not that all of them aren't a little bit confusing and paradoxical in nature, but usually the point stands out and makes sense. This bit about the master carpenter and the blade of the master carpenter being sure to cut his own hands, whoever uses this blade, you would think a master carpenter would be careful with a blade. You know, you'd think that would be the one person that wouldn't cut themselves, and if they did, it was... I'm confused by that choice of the word master carpenter. I wonder if the translations in different forms could reveal something for me personally that may have that make a different meaning. I wonder what you got out of it, though, ladies and gentlemen. The first half of the verse, though, makes clear sense. If you realize that all things change, then there is nothing, I'll add, permanent that you will try to hold on to, and you will begin flowing with the changing of the things and becoming a part of that, which gets you to a more spiritual, less attached and physical perspective of life, maybe. The second, or the third and fourth lines are, if you are not afraid of dying, there is nothing you cannot achieve. This makes me think of the old phrase, someone who has nothing to lose, watch out for that. But my mind is working interestingly today, ladies and gentlemen. So let's see where we go, diving into what Dr. Wayne Dyer has to think and say about this 74th verse of the Tao Te Ching. It seems to have such an interesting message about this concept of change and dying and no longer being afraid. And then that second part there about this being the Lord of Death, or somebody who is maybe, causing destruction and harm in the world. Living with no fear of death. Wayne Dyer begins. What happens when we die? He poses the ultimate question. And I would ask you to ponder that for yourself. I mean, don't you remember as a kid doing this, thinking deep, like, whoa, when you first discovered that this concept was a reality and you actually thought deep about it, it's like, is there just a nothingness forever? But without consciousness, you would not be able to experience nothingness. So it wouldn't be like a constant experience of nothingness. There would just be no experience at all. But see, I never got to that point when I was a kid. So I thought it would just be millions of years in the entirety of the rest of time and just nothingness or black, no experience. But meanwhile, experiencing that. Anyways, what happens when we die? Is death the vehicle that returns us to our source of being? Or does it signify the end of consciousness and all of life? One thing is absolutely certain, Wayne says. The subject is an absolute mystery to us. And I think it's great to remind ourselves that, because so many of us, and so oftentimes, we are convinced that we know the way things work and we know exactly, we come convinced by our social norms maybe, and then forget that we don't actually really know, and it's totally an absolute mystery to all of us. And so maybe we should stop pretending or being so certain about topics like this. Wayne continues, some Tao scholars have referred to death as a place of oneness, wherein time, space, and all of the 10,000 things cease to have meaning. Thus, what dies is our human identity. There's still someone underneath that external layers, someone underneath the external layers, though. So when you know and understand who that formless someone is, your fear of dying will evaporate. What he's describing there is something formless that is beyond the form. That part of you, he talks about it like that part of you that, used to run and jump over that fence. He goes, that part of you is still in there. You're the same, or that part of you that was 6 years old riding a bike or whatever it be. You're still that same thing. It is just the outside that has changed. But it's not like you still wouldn't want to do those things despite not quite having the physical capacity anymore. This is just, to me, a sign of this spiritual version of yourself, that ageless self. And I believe that's a book in its own about this subject. So if you'd like to dive deeper into this subject further than just today's video, this is something that Wayne talks about and many of his contemporaries. And ageless self, just search that up and see what comes up with that. But getting to this philosophy and understanding, I'm going to read that bit again because it was confusing for me the first time. Thus, so this idea, Tao scholars have referred to death as a place of oneness wherein time and space and all of the 10,000 things in the physical world that we have put labels on as being separate, rather than just being a part of the Tao, cease to have meaning. I would say separateness. Thus, what dies is our human ego identity and identification as being separate from all things through the concepts of time and space, which we've learned more about in the mystical Hermetic philosophy. And so, if you'd like to learn more about that, join me on Wednesdays, ladies and gentlemen, or check out the playlist. So, this human ego identity that's connected to time and space and all of these things evaporates, and there's still someone, whoever we really are, I'll add, underneath the external layers. So, when you know and understand who that formless someone is, your fear of dying will evaporate. And that's a bold statement, because even I have contemplated this very much for many years, and I know myself to be a spiritual being having a temporary human experience, and this ego mask of my current character identity as Chase and all the things that make up who I am and what I do isn't really who I am. That is just like my role. It makes me think of the old theater masks. You know, you'd have the white one and the black one, and one would be angry. And we all put on these masks and play our roles as the characters that we are given and turn out to be in this world. But there is something behind every one of us that is far more than any one of us could know from the characters we experience from each other. And if that's too deep, then I apologize. These are just the things that I think about sometimes, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're getting value, consider subscribing. Now, and leave me a comment, let me know what you think. Let us continue. So this formless someone, your ageless self, you can live on the active side of infinity by knowing your infinite spiritual or Tao nature, which probably means that you'll alter the way that you think about birth, life, and death. See, I think about it like many, many lifetimes. And this is just one of the very many. Sometimes I joke and say thousands, and my friend will say, hopefully it's not that many, man. Like, that would be a lot. But there's a lot of work to do, ladies and gentlemen. If we're ascending as non-physical consciousness through experiences of duality, non-dual consciousness experiencing and improving itself through these experiences of duality. It's very deep. I'm telling you, all of this is very deep, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to continue with what Wayne Dyer has to say here. So you move from wanting to see permanence in your life to realizing that all things change due to the nature of this being an ever-modifying world. There's nothing external to hold on to. After all, the moment you think you have it, it becomes something else. This is as true as for your earthly packaging as it is for your worldly treasures. Whether you realize it or not, the body you were in when you began reading this essay or listening to this video, ladies and gentlemen, is different than the very one we began with. And it will become different again the moment you attempt to make it remain the same. And this is one of those ultimate lessons that is a great and important understanding. It must be accepted as good and natural and on purpose to nature and harmony and the Tao. Even though sometimes this natural law and universal law and the way of, the functioning of reality goes against the way that we would like things to be. It's unfortunate because usually we have a limited perspective. And so we think we should control everything and everything should work the way that we think it should. But I sometimes wonder if we had a new perspective, if we were able to change our thoughts, it might change our experience. And so that's what we're doing here, ladies and gentlemen, is we're attempting to get a greater understanding of reality in order to increase the quality of our experience through research and diving into the lost wisdom of the ages, ladies and gentlemen. Spiritual philosophy. So this is as true for our earthly packaging as it is for our worldly treasures. It will be different no matter how much we attempt to make it remain the same. This is the nature of our reality, like I just said. If you can get comfortable with it and accept reality for what it is, you'll reduce and ultimately eliminate your anxiety regarding physical change as well as aging and your own mortality. Now, once again, that is a bold statement, and I understand that. As Lao-tzu promises, Wayne continues, quote, "If you are not afraid of dying, there is nothing you cannot achieve. Your Tao essence has to be infinite because it came from a world of infinite possibilities. You're not a thing that's solid, permanent. In fact, there's nothing like that in the world, especially this one we find ourselves in. And you can find examples of that everywhere you look. And so understanding, accepting, and knowing this, I'll add, leads us to a new place." Wayne continues, "You're real. So we are real. And what's real never changes. Here's the paradox." And I was hoping we'd get a good paradox today because I always love a good paradox, ladies and gentlemen. We are in, and we've talked about this recently in both series on Wednesday and Tuesday, into the Hermetics and the wisdom of the Tao, but it's this paradoxical understanding that we are in an infinitely changing universe that is changeless. And it's this idea that was just given to us here, is that we are real and we are in this world of changeless, endless change, constant change, but at the same time, what underlies the essence is unchanging and is changeless. So you could say, as this goes into what we've been learning in the Hermetic philosophy of describing the nature of reality from a mystical, spiritual perspective, but this idea that there is a non-physical archetype or, natural law, you could call it simply, or some people would call it God, a changeless thing that is running all of the operations of change that we see mirrored in the physical realm. And so even though our physical form is ever changing, that which is the essence underlying it is changeless. But then wouldn't you say that that would mean that your soul doesn't develop and you're not, that would put an argument to the purpose of the multiple lifetimes and to increase, our soul level. I never know how to describe that actually, because that's another really deep philosophy. But let us continue, ladies and gentlemen. This idea that you are real and what's real never changes. Yet your real self isn't in this world, but it is the part of you that is the Tao, or the spiritual part of us. When you live in harmony with the infinite force, or Tao, death is irrelevant. So know your highest self and understand that there's nothing that you can't achieve, Wayne Dyer tells us. And he continues the second part of this verse, which was more confusing to me, ladies and gentlemen, deals with killing or taking another being's life. Lao-tzu is quite specific here, saying there is always a Lord of Death. At the moment of your coming into the world, everything you needed for this journey was handled by the Lord of life and death. Now, that could be debated philosophically. And, everybody will have their own opinion on these things. Once again, we're just talking about a concept to help us think in new ways, ladies and gentlemen. So just as your birth was Tao energy or force or, this universal energy, our body type, skin color, eyes, ears, and every other physical aspect of us are expressions of this force or the Tao. This includes our death, which has been choreographed, determined, and once again, this is debatable, and allowed to unfold in divine timing. See, I think that last bit is not debatable. It will all happen in divine timing. And we can trust that it is right. And that is the most difficult part. And this is why I don't like to talk about this subject as much as I used to, because getting to that point to where you trust and you can see tragedy and death and destruction and have to trust the universe and God, a Tao, or Tao force, universal, grand organized design, whatever that be, ladies and gentlemen, knowing that we are not separate from it and it is all things as well as us, then the death and the destruction and the tragedy in the world is that as well. And we are that. And so there is the only explanation I've got is why is there good thing, why if everything is God, then is there all this terrible things happening in reality? And I would say, well, that's part of duality, which is a universal law, but I think in order for there to be the positive, you need the opposite polarity to exist. And technically, I also think that in order to increase the amount of positive, you would need a push from the opposite pole. In order to create change, in order to create a solution, you first need a problem. But this, once again, is a circular debate that could go simply back to the idea of duality and oneness. But, ladies and gentlemen, see, that's like I said, this is one of those subjects that you have to come to at your own time when you're ready. And so if this is helping you get there, then thank you so much for being here. I love and appreciate all of you for spending time with me and Dr. Wayne Dyer and Lao-tzu and discovering the wisdom of the Tao. Now, just as your birth was down, so our whole form, divine timing. In other words, killing isn't your job, nor ever, not of another person or any other being. Since death is as much a part of the Tao as life is, it must be allowed to be in accord with nature, not performed as an ego decision. See, we like to think that we know the way the universe is supposed to work because we're thinking from our ego most of the time, living in this experience. So when someone close to us is lost, we think that it should not have happened. And that is, very respectable and very understandable. So it is very difficult, I would say, without very much work to get to this understanding of it was divine timing. And if I were able to zoom out of time and space and see all of reality, then we would know that it was perfect. And that, especially if we have multiple lifetimes, then the timing would really get interesting. But Wayne says, since death is as much a part of the Tao as life, it must be allowed to be in accord with nature, not performed as an ego decision in divine timing. Must be understood and respected. I learned this lesson years ago, he says, while changing court sides in the middle of a tennis match, in which I began, no, in which I had been playing at an exceptionally high level. While taking a drink of water, I noticed a bee lying upside down. And apparently in the final throes of its short life, I assumed that it was suffering. So I stepped on it to avoid prolonging its agony. I mean, how many of us have done this? Now, I asked the great mystical question, was that better? Or was it supposed to be left to divine timing? And was that divine timing? Who knows? But as I began playing again, I couldn't get the bee out of my mind. Did I do the right thing? Who am I to decide this little creature's fate? Who am I to become an executioner even to such a seemingly insignificant creature as a tiny insect? And everything on the tennis court began to take on a different energy from that moment on. Previously, my shots had been landing on the lines, and presently they were out by inches. The wind seemed to shift and work against me, and now was moving more slowly and making uncharacteristic errors. Ultimately, what looked like a sure victory turned into a complete letdown and embarrassing defeat because of my role as a well-intentioned murderer of a small bee had been occupying my mind, Wayne says. This is why I like Wayne. He always finds a way to bring these deeper subjects to a more practical, day-to-day kind of scenario that we can each kind of relate to. And so I've since changed the way I see death, he says, and I no longer deliberately kill anything. I've decided that it's not my job to decide another's death ever since my day of awakening with that bee. I personally have had this for a few years now, where I avoid killing anything as much as possible. I mean, even if there's a small insect inside the apartment here, I try to take it out and leave it to its destiny, because I personally had this own experience of trying to save, I think it was a caterpillar, and it was about to go off the edge of this. It was like some rocks and like a man-made tunnel where the water was flowing through for the river, and there was a little walkway over top, and there was a caterpillar, and he was about to walk off straight into the river and go whew. And so I was like, oh no, so I saved the caterpillar. This was before I really even thought this way. And what happened is I put him up here and over here, and then I was hanging out there and chatting with whoever we were with at the time, and so I was kind of monitoring the caterpillar as we're hanging out, and I noticed there he goes again. He's running, he's whatever caterpillars do in their own form of running, back towards the same ledge, and he wants to jump in the water. So a third time I moved him further away, this time to the other side. And after a few minutes of being, in conversation, distracted, I noticed the caterpillar on the other side doing the same thing. Eventually, he ended up just going in the water, ladies and gentlemen. And I was like, no matter what I did, it was one of those times to where you're like, you wonder if you would have just left it, if it would have not fallen off. But then the third time it went to the other side and went right off. I don't know, but it was one of these things where I like, all right, in the future, I'm going to just leave it alone, because I don't know the more you mess with nature, the more you mess it up, ladies and gentlemen. So don't mess with nature too much in an attempt to improve it from your own ego human perspective, thinking that you know all of reality. But even more personally, later on, I came to this understanding of oneness, in that God is all things and that we are a part of that. And so that when you look at the spiders and the ants and the insects and all the animals and the trees and the plants and the grass and everything, rocks are all part of this consciousness field and are different parts of this consciousness field. And when you kill anything, you kill the generic idea of life. and consciousness. And so, once you get to that understanding, you see small things like little bees and ants and whatever it be, the things you used to see as pets, as messengers and as God and as a part of you. And then you have a real kind of reservation and an awe and wonder. I almost like a mystical confusion about what these things really are once you've changed your thoughts and have begun changing your life, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's work further. This is getting to be a longer one than I intended. Everything previously, okay, he's talk about the tennis court delivery. I decided that it's not my job to decide another's death, even since my day of awakening with that bee. Even if that bee had only been a few minutes of life remaining, it is the job of the Lord, or the Tao, to make that determination. I just spoke with my dear friend Lauren, he says, who's in the throes of watching her cat, who's been with her for 19 years, getting ready to pass on. She asked for my advice about having sweet pea. Sweet pea. Oh, poor sweet pea. Euthanized to avoid prolonging her suffering. After I read her verse and told her my own experience with that bee, Lauren elected to hold sweet pea in her lap until that time came. A reverence for life as a form of the Tao helps us all realize that we're not in charge of these kind of decisions. Lao-tzu's legacy is summed up magnificently in the words of T.S. Eliot from his poem, Little Gidding. What shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. To arrive from where we started, ladies and gentlemen, and to know it for the first time. To have a new perspective and a new awareness. I'd love to go through that whole poem sometime. It's very powerful on this subject. But to go is the idea of going on this journey of life. And to start and go out and, think of all the stories and all the books and the movies and the adventures that you've ever seen, and this concept of the hero's journey of going out and growing and exploring and getting to the peak and then having the ultimate challenge and, to make the ultimate decisions and then to come back. And we shall not cease from exploration. And at the end, though, of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started, to come back to the place where you began, ladies and gentlemen, where we began, our source, and know that place for the very first time. I just love that. It's so beautiful. Wayne continues, this is death. Nothing to fear, nothing to do. This is what I believe Lao-tzu is saying to us today, ladies and gentlemen, in this profound verse of the Tao Te Ching. And of Change Your Thoughts and Change Your Life. From Dr. Wayne Dyer, he says, discontinue fearing your death. It makes as much sense to think about your death in fearful terms as it does to perceive the color of your eyes in such a way. The Tao is in it all, birth, life, and passing times. Reread this T.S. Eliot quote, as well as the 40th verse of the Tao Te Ching, which I entitled Living by Returning and Yielding. If you remember that episode, it's in the series, ladies and gentlemen. By returning in our passing, we will truly know the Tao, perhaps for the very first time. And number 2, ladies and gentlemen, examine the ways that you kill. Make a decision that you are no longer going to serve in the capacity of a quote-unquote executioner, including even the smallest and seemingly most insignificant creatures. And then act on it. Live this principle by allowing the Lord of life and death to decide when the return trip is to be made. Divine timing, universal intelligence, ladies and gentlemen. Do not make this a crusade. Just make your own commitment to exist in harmony with the Tao. And by all means, do not impose your beliefs on others. For non-interference is one of the major positions and teachings of the Tao and living a Tao-centered life. I'm so glad he put that in there in this teaching, because that is very important. That should be the disclaimer I said at the beginning of this video. Do not make this a crusade, and just make your own commitment to exist in harmony with the Tao. This is why I don't like to talk about this subject as much as I used to when I learned it. When I learned it, I was like, everybody needs to know this and think this way. And I realized that sometimes, forget how it goes, but there are forms of spiritual violence, ladies and gentlemen, to where waking somebody up, or, you know, pushing some, giving somebody, I don't know. There are things when people aren't ready, it is actually spiritual violence to try to force them to get there. So do not impose your beliefs on others. And I would like to say that it is not my intention of doing that here at all. For non-interference is one of the major principles of spiritual alignment with the force, the Tao. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of each one of these wonderful chapters, Wayne Dyer gives us a practical way that we can put this into application in our lives. And he calls it Do the Tao Now. This is why you should get the book for yourself, to put it on your shelf. And it's linked in the description below the video, ladies and gentlemen. He says, do the Tao now. During meditation, practice dying while still alive, metaphorically. This is, leave your body and discard it and float above the world. This will help you disconnect yourself from feeling that your physical shell is who you really are. Like, imagine yourself, I'll add, being nowhere, at no time, and nobody, and no thing. And, you know, all of these things that we give descriptions, just put a no in front of it and try to cancel it all out. And the more you do that, it just boggles the mind. And it's a fun practice to try to get yourself to coming to think from these new perspectives. This will help you disconnect yourself from the feeling that our physical shell is who we really are. The more you are the observer, rather than the object of what you see, the easier it will be to remove your fear of dying. This is, just do this for a few minutes daily, maybe even 10 seconds, if that's where you have to start. I mean, meditation is something that is a practice, ladies and gentlemen, a lifetime commitment. So if you just take 30 seconds to contemplate whatever it be, or to try to clear your mind, it is worthy and worthwhile. Do this for just a few minutes daily. Remember that you are not this body. You are a piece of the infinite divine force, Tao, never changing and never dying. This excerpt from Neil Donald Walsh's Communion with God elaborates on this thought, quote unquote. Which snowflake is the most significant? Is it possible that they are all magnificent, and that celebrating their magnificence together, they create an awesome display? Then they melt into each other and into the oneness, yet they never go away. They never disappear. They never cease to be. Simply, they change form. And not just once, but several times, from solid to liquid, from liquid to vapor, and from the seen to the unseen, to rise again, and then to return in new displays of breathtaking beauty and wonder. This, ladies and gentlemen, is life. Nourishing life. And this is you. And this is us. The metaphor is complete. The metaphor is real. Wayne says, you will make this real in your experience when you simply decide that it is true and act in that way. See the beauty and the wonder of all those whose lives that you've touched, including nature. For you are each wondrous indeed, and yet no one more wondrous than another. And you will all, and you all will one day melt back. We will all one day, ladies and gentlemen, melt back into this oneness and know then that we form together this single stream, this breathtaking beauty and wonder. Wow, ladies and gentlemen, that was a mind blower. I had no idea. That was incredible and powerful and definitely life-changing if taken in the right way. At the right time, you know, sometimes these things have to come at the right time for each of us. Honestly, I'll say before beginning this video, I didn't want to do it. Just being honest, ladies and gentlemen, I was like, no, I don't like this subject and I'm feeling off today. You know, I kind of wanted to take a day off, but ladies and gentlemen, I told myself maybe that's the best time to do a video, is when you don't want to do it. And so I sat down and pressed record. And that's the secret, is showing up, ladies and gentlemen, practicing the art of showing up. With that being said, I may take a day off tomorrow or next week. Who knows? But until then, ladies and gentlemen, continue to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment. Continue to seek to discover the wisdom of the ages and the hidden mysteries of our reality, and seek to discover the mysteries of our history. And continue, ladies and gentlemen, to make happiness the way. There is no way to happiness. Happiness is what we must bring to life. And so all the things that we've been telling ourselves, oh, I'll be happy when I get there, that becomes irrelevant because we are there, and then hopefully the entire journey is wonderful. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I love and appreciate all of you being here, seeking after this greater awareness and greater understanding of the nature of reality, and trying to change our thoughts and change our life and change the way we look at things and have the things that we look at change. All right, until tomorrow. If we do come tomorrow with more lost wisdom of the pharaohs on Wednesday Wisdom, going through the Hermetica, it is the birth of human culture and how fascinating that could be. Hermes describes how human beings became civilized and created culture under the guidance of Osiris and the goddess Isis. Very interesting, ladies and gentlemen. All right, thank you so much. I love and appreciate all of you. Be sure to expand the description below to get the book for yourself, to put it on your shelf, ladies and gentlemen, for reference in the future, as well as a link to my landscape paintings and C60 Purple Power, the most powerful antioxidant known to man. Give yourself the gift of health. All right, love you, ladies and gentlemen. Until next week or tomorrow, be the change you want to see. Be the example.